Hello YouTube, this is Asatsu5 and today I'm going to be talking about the differences between Wootz steel and Damascus steel, which they'll both consider Damascus, but they are used interchangeably. But Damascus, as we know it, is a pattern-welded steel, and Wootz is a crucible steel. A crucible being a stone or clay pot that steel is melted to. They put all the elements they want into it. It's superheated and melted into a liquid in the crucible, which is broken open and gives you an ingot. These ingots are used to make swords or guitars, shamshields, towels, and weapons are what the Wootz steel got famous from, like during the Crusades and the Crusaders thought that the Damascus steel had kind of magical properties. It looked different, and they thought it was better than their standard steel, which they're both mono steels. They're not. Today's Damascus is a pattern welded steel made of different steels welded together, creating a billet that's made into cutlery. And Wootz steel is a mono steel that has all these swirls in it, sometimes referred to as a wattled steel. And I find that these are relatively ugly compared to modern Damascus or pattern welded steel, which is very striking. Modern Damascus or pattern welded steel is used or made when you stack different steels together, you weld them together and pound them out. Here's a shot of it being pounded out, and depending on how you pound it and twist it, you get different patterns in the steel. Now, what's good to remember is that the Anglo-Saxons had pattern-welded steel way before the Middle Ages. They actually mastered it, and I think they actually did a better job with it than most ABS mastersmiths today. And they made these pattern-welded steels, and some people speculate that these pattern-welded steels were not necessarily superior to mono steels, but it had a kind of a religious and symbolic meaning to the Anglo-Saxons, the Franks, the Vikings, because the patterns were made to look like snakes and dragons, and they felt it gave the sword power that it honestly probably didn't really have. Why is this important? I think in the Middle Ages, when people started going to the Orient and they started going to fight the Crusades in Damascus and Syria, and they encountered these steels, they wouldn't necessarily be impressed with pattern-welded steel. They would be impressed with the Wootz steel, which had its own good qualities, but I feel they would have known about pattern-welded steel, so they wouldn't necessarily be impressed with pattern-welded steel. So Damascus is actually Wootz is actually very different from Damascus. They're both called Damascus because they both have the swirly designs in them, and to the untrained eye, people in the cutlery business and history business, it's very hard to tell the difference between Damascus and Wootz, so we use the words interchangeably. But what happened to Wootz? A lot of people say that Wootz disappeared, that it's a lost art, and it's indeed very hard to come by. There are a handful of makers that still use Wootz, but a lot of them will tell you there's a reason why Wootz is not used today, like in India and at least during the 19th century, India started importing their blades from Sheffield and Solian, and started using those steels instead of Wootz steel. So obviously they felt these foreign blades were superior to Wootz. Otherwise they would still be making Wootz. But this is just a brief description or history of pattern-welded steel and Wootz steel, true Damascus. I guess I shouldn't use the term true Damascus, but it's the original Damascus. Keep in mind that during the migration area, the Dark Ages, both the Anglo-Saxons and the Vikings had pattern-welded steel, and they've mastered it. But it was eventually replaced by monosteels, and in fact, the Vikings actually got crucible steel from India or the Orient and used them to make the Ulfbont swords. But that's a different story. 99% of the Dark Age swords from the Vikings, the Anglo-Saxons, and so on and so forth were all pattern welded steel, and they weren't necessarily superior. But during the Middle Ages, when people started traveling to the Orient, they did recognize the Wootz steel, and the legend kind of grew from there. So that's it. I'm not an expert on this at all, but I did want to share the difference between Wootz steel, which is a crucible steel, a mono steel, and Damascus or pattern welded steel that we know of today. That's often referred to as Damascus. Thank you very much. I hope y'all have a great day. I'm a Satsu 5, and I'm out.